What happens when the person you trust most in the world, the anchor of your entire existence, becomes a stranger before your very eyes? In the flickering candlelight of a house plunged into darkness by a raging storm, I saw them. My mother, her face tilted upwards in a way I hadn't seen in years, wrapped in the arms of another man. His head dipped down and their lips met in a kiss that shattered my entire world, a silent, devastating explosion in the heart of an 11-year-old girl. Before we dive into this incredibly moving and painful story, please make sure you hit that like button and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on our future stories. Your support means the world. And now, let's begin Lily's journey. In my memory, the golden years of our family feel like a faded, sun-drenched photograph, warm to the touch and achingly distant. Winter evenings were the best, a sacred time. The whole family would gather in the living room, a warm cocoon against the world's chill. A fire would be crackling merrily in the hearth, its flames painting dancing, elongated shadows on the walls and ceiling. I'd be curled up on my mother's lap, her familiar scent of vanilla and lavender enveloping me like the softest blanket as I listened to my grandfather, George, spin fantastic fairy tales. His voice was a low, comforting rumble, a steady beat in the rhythm of our lives. It was occasionally punctuated by my father's cheerful interjections, adding a dramatic flair or a funny twist to the story that always made me giggle. No, Dad, my father Tom would laugh, his own voice rich with amusement. The dragon didn't just breathe fire, he sneezed sparks because he had a terrible head cold. That's why the knight's armor got all sooty. Grandpa would chuckle and play along. Ah, a sneezing dragon. A much more formidable foe indeed. The knight probably thought he was being attacked with glitter. My mother, Sarah, would laugh then, a sound like sparkling bells, a melody that could warm the coldest room. Her eyes would crinkle at the corners, reflecting the pure, simple joy of those moments. I remember studying her face in the firelight, thinking she was the most beautiful woman in the world. In that warm, fire-lit room, surrounded by their palpable love, I believed with the unshakable certainty of a child that our family was a fortress, its walls built of laughter and love, unbreachable and eternal. But life, as I would learn with a crushing, soul-altering finality, is no fairy tale. The walls of a fortress can crumble from within silently until all that's left is dust. The first changes arrived not with a bang, but as silent, insidious whispers, like a cold draft seeping through invisible cracks in a window pane. My dad started coming home later. The scent of his office, stale coffee and paper, clung to him more strongly than his familiar aftershave. The long, lingering hugs he used to give me at the door, scooping me up until my head touched the ceiling, became hurried pats on the head, his eyes already looking past me towards his study. His evenings were increasingly consumed by hushed, tense phone calls taken behind the firmly closed study door. Sometimes I would press my ear against the wood, catching fragments of words like extension, unacceptable losses, and I don't know what else to do. They were adult words, heavy and sharp, and they made a knot of fear tighten in my stomach. My mother began to drift away from us, from me. I'd often find her standing by the living room window, her arms wrapped around herself as if holding in a chill, staring blankly out at the manicured front lawn she once took such pride in. Her gaze was distant, lost in a world I couldn't enter. I'd ask, "What are you looking at, Mom?" And she would startle, a faint, sad smile touching her lips. "Oh, nothing, sweetie, just thinking." But she never said what she was thinking about. Our family dinners, once boisterous affairs filled with stories from our day, grew quiet. The silence stretched across the polished mahogany of the dinner table, thick and heavy, punctuated only by the nervous clinking of silverware against porcelain. Laughter became a rare and precious commodity, a ghost of a sound in a house that was forgetting how to be happy. I felt the shift in the very air of our home. Children have a sixth sense for these things, an ability to detect the subtle barometric pressure changes in the emotional atmosphere. I felt it in the heaviness that settled over the house, a physical weight on my chest. I felt it in the way my parents' gazes would slide past each other, never quite meeting, like two ships passing in the night. I felt it in the strained smiles that never reached their eyes, and the reluctant pats on the head that replaced genuine, warm affection. Grandpa George seemed to notice too. He still visited every Sunday, his pockets filled with the peppermints I loved, and his head full of stories. But his smile didn't reach his wise old eyes as often, and his voice, when he told his tales, was quieter, slower, as if the memories themselves had become heavier to carry. He would look from my mother's pale face to my father's tense shoulders, and a shadow of deep sadness would cross his own features. I tried, in my own desperate, childish way, to mend the growing cracks. I'd draw cheerful pictures of our family, all of us holding hands under a giant smiling sun, and tape them to the refrigerator. I'd be extra good, cleaning my room without being asked, and acing my spelling tests, hoping that my perfection could somehow balance out their growing imperfections. I'd try to make my mother laugh with silly jokes I'd heard at school. I told myself that if I just smiled enough, if I was good enough, everything would magically snap back into place. But at night, in the profound quiet of my room, I could sometimes hear a faint, high-pitched sound, like ice cracking on a frozen lake in early spring. A sound so small, yet so impossible to ignore. Our family was still a perfect picture from the outside, but within the frame, the cracks were spreading, silent and colorless, and I, with a small heart that lacked the words to name the suffocating unease, could only clutch my worn teddy bear Jasper to my chest and pray. I prayed that the good things wouldn't vanish, that if I just squeezed my eyes shut tight enough, I would open them to find everything was as it had been. But I was beginning to learn that once cracks appear, they only grow, silently widening until the whole world collapses. Nothing shattered all at once. It was a slow, painful erosion. My father's empty chair at the dinner table became a more frequent sight. The meals my mother cooked, pot roast, steamed vegetables, his favorite mushroom soup, would sit on the counter, growing cold under a layer of plastic wrap. Mom would sigh, a quiet, defeated sound that seemed to carry all the world's weariness, before putting his plate in the fridge. She'd then turn to me with a bright, brittle smile. "Eat up, sweetie. Daddy's working hard for us." Her smile never reached her eyes. I found myself eating more slowly, the food tasting like ash in my mouth, my stomach churning with a nameless anxiety. Then David started showing up more. David was my dad's best friend from college, my Uncle David. At first, his presence was a welcome relief from the oppressive quiet. He was a whirlwind of energy and jokes, possessing a magical ability to turn a boring Tuesday afternoon into a grand adventure. He played intense games of checkers with me on the living room rug, never letting me win easily. He taught me how to fly a kite in the sprawling backyard, running alongside me, cheering as it caught the wind. He always seemed to be around to fix a leaky faucet or a squeaky door hinge that my dad was too busy to notice. Mom was different when David was around. She was lighter, more vibrant, like a flower turning towards the sun. The deep furrows of worry on her brow would smooth out, and her laughter, that beautiful bell-like sound I missed so dearly, would fill the house again. I vividly remember one afternoon, Mom was in the kitchen, attempting to bake a cake for a school bake sale. David, who was there to fix the garbage disposal, playfully dabbed a bit of flour on her nose. She gasped in mock outrage and then, laughing, tossed a dish towel at him. They both dissolved into laughter, a shared, carefree moment of joy that felt both wonderful and strangely out of place. I laughed with them, thinking this was just what close family friends did. It was happy. But as the weeks bled into months, I began to notice things, small details that pricked at my consciousness. David's friendly touches on my mother's arm seemed to linger just a second too long. There was a different quality to the way their eyes met across a room, a charge, an unspoken conversation that I couldn't decipher but that made my stomach feel tight and cold. It wasn't the comfortable, familiar way my dad looked at Mom. It wasn't like anything I had ever seen. One evening, I was curled on the armchair in the living room, pretending to read, while Mom and David were talking in the kitchen. Their voices were low, a soft murmur I couldn't make out, but every now and then, a soft shared laugh would drift out. I lifted my head and peered towards the kitchen. The warm yellow light from the lamp over the sink illuminated their faces. They were standing so close, their hips almost touching, and Mom leaned in slightly as David whispered something in her ear, her shoulders shaking with silent laughter. In that moment, watching them share a secret in the soft glow, I felt like an intruder in my own home. A strange, chilling sensation seeped into my chest. I put my book down, hugging Jasper tighter. I wanted to believe I was imagining things, that this was just how adults who were good friends behaved. But a tiny, poisonous seed of doubt had been planted, and it was beginning to take root in the fertile soil of my young, anxious heart. David's presence became a fixture, an almost daily occurrence. He'd drop by with pastries after school, help Mom clear out the garage on a Saturday, even accompany her on grocery runs. Though he was always cheerful and kind to me, I started to feel an unease I couldn't name. One afternoon, while I was coloring on the porch steps, I heard Mom call him inside to look at a flickering hallway light. I glanced up and saw them standing in the dim hallway, their shoulders almost touching. Mom smiled at him, a soft, gentle smile, and her eyes sparkled in a way I hadn't seen them sparkle for my dad in a very long time. As David reached for the switch, he placed a hand on the small of her back, a brief, seemingly casual gesture to steady her. But it lasted a moment too long. It was proprietary. I saw it, and I knew. You didn't need to touch someone like that just to fix a light. After that, I became a detective of my own heartbreak. I noticed every time he called her Sarah in a low, intimate tone. I noticed the way she'd smile softly at a text message, then quickly lock her phone and slip it into her pocket if I walked into the room. Each observation was a tiny, sharp shard of glass embedding itself in my heart. I started to withdraw, to avoid David. Where I once would have excitedly shown him my school projects, I now offered mumbled replies and retreated to my room. I pulled away from my mother too. I gave one-word answers, dodged her hugs, and avoided the gaze that had once been my greatest source of comfort. One night at dinner, Dad, home for once, asked Mom about a business trip he had coming up. "Did you remember to book the dog sitter?" he asked casually. Mom looked up, startled, as if yanked from a deep reverie. "Oh, yes, of course, I'll arrange it," she replied, her voice a little too high, a little too shaky. I watched from across the table and saw my dad's brow furrow for a split second before his expression smoothed over again. The rest of the meal was consumed in a deafening silence, the sound of our forks and knives against the plates like the ticking of a terrible clock. I looked from my mother to my father, and it felt as though an impassable chasm had opened up between them. And I, a small girl, was stranded in the middle, clinging to the wreckage, consumed by a loneliness so profound it felt like a physical weight. That night, I burrowed under my covers, determined not to cry, but the tears came anyway, silent, hot streams soaking my pillow. They weren't tears from being scolded or getting a bad grade. They were tears of a far deeper grief, the realization that the people I loved most, the universe I had believed was infallible, were slowly, inexorably slipping away from me, and I was helpless, able to do nothing but curl into myself, hugging my knees in a darkness that felt like it was swallowing me whole. The day it all came crashing down started with rain. A heavy, relentless downpour began in the afternoon, with slate-gray clouds pressing down on our roof and the wind howling through the trees like a mournful ghost. Dinner that night was even quieter than usual. Dad had called earlier. His flight was canceled due to the storm, and he was stuck overnight in Chicago. On the phone, Mom's responses were just a series of monosyllabic hums, her exhaustion palpable even through the receiver. I picked at my food, my eyes darting towards her every few moments. Her face was a mask of weary indifference, a landscape both near and impossibly far. The power had been flickering all afternoon, and just as we were finishing our meal, the entire neighborhood was plunged into an inky, suffocating blackness. Mom fumbled in a kitchen drawer, her hands finding a pack of emergency candles. She lit a few, and the flickering yellow light cast long, dancing shadows on the walls, making the familiar objects in our home seem alien and menacing, as if they were whispering secrets to each other. I retreated to the big armchair, clutching Jasper, a formless dread coiling in my stomach. A few minutes later, the doorbell rang. 3 quick, sharp knocks. A familiar pattern. Mom glanced at me, offered a small, reassuring nod, and went to the door. Standing on the porch, drenched in a glistening raincoat, was David. He held a small, powerful flashlight, and his smile was a flash of white in the gloom. "Heard the power went out," he said, his voice easy and light. "Came to see if you guys needed anything." Mom smiled back, a real smile that reached her eyes, a smile I hadn't seen her give my father in what felt like a lifetime. I watched in silence as David stepped inside, bringing the smell of rain and cold night air with him. They lit more candles, placing them around the living room until the space was bathed in a soft, wavering glow. The flickering light softened all the sharp edges, making everything hazy and unreal, as if our house had floated into a dream. Mom and David sat on the sofa, closer than they usually would. They spoke in hushed tones, their heads bent together, and every so often, a shared laugh would escape, intimate and conspiratorial. I pretended to be engrossed in an old picture book, but the words and images were a meaningless blur. All my senses were on high alert, listening, watching, waiting, though I didn't know what I was waiting for. Time stretched on, thick and slow. Outside, the rain beat a steady rhythm on the roof, punctuated by the distant low rumble of thunder. At one point, Mom stood up to get another candle from the kitchen. David followed her. As they walked, his hand rested lightly on her back, a touch that could have been accidental but felt deliberate, possessive, and achingly gentle. My heart began to pound a frantic, heavy rhythm against my ribs. I couldn't stand it anymore. After a few minutes, I slid off the chair, my stockinged feet silent on the hardwood floor, pretending I was going to the kitchen for a glass of water. The flickering candlelight guided my steps. As I neared the kitchen doorway, I heard their whispers, my mother's voice, soft and breathy. Then David's, a choked laugh, followed by a deep sigh. I held my breath, my small body pressed against the cool wall, and peered around the doorframe. And in that single frozen moment, my world ended. There, in the intimate glow of a single candle, was my mother, wrapped in David's arms. Her face was turned up to his, her eyes closed, her expression one of passionate surrender, an expression I had never seen her wear for my father. David leaned down, and they kissed. It wasn't a peck. It wasn't a friendly gesture. It was a deep, lingering, desperate kiss. The kind I had only seen in movies, the kind I hadn't seen my mother give my dad in years. A gasp caught in my throat. I stumbled back, the glass of water slipping from my trembling fingers and shattering on the floor, with a sound that seemed to echo the breaking of my own heart. They sprang apart, their eyes wide with shock and guilt. The moment my mother's gaze met mine, the room seemed to freeze. Her face went deathly pale, her lips moving without a sound. David backed away, his face a mask of pure panic. I didn't wait to hear their excuses. I turned and fled, my footsteps pounding on the stairs, a frantic, desperate escape from the flickering candlelight and the broken pieces of my family lying on the kitchen floor. "Lily, wait!" My mother's voice, thin and reedy, chased after me, but I didn't stop. I slammed my bedroom door, the sound echoing the finality of what I'd seen. I slid down the door, my back pressed against the cold wood, and drew my knees up to my chest. My heart hammered against my ribs, and my head spun. Everything I had ever believed in, my mother, my family, the safety of this home, had just been obliterated. Tears finally came, a silent, racking deluge. I didn't sob out loud. I buried my face in my knees, my entire body shaking with violent, silent tremors. Outside my door, I could hear my mother knocking softly. "Lily, honey, please. I'm so sorry. Please open the door." I didn't answer. I bit my lip until I tasted blood, curling into a tighter ball, wishing I could shrink into nothingness and disappear. The night wore on, the candles downstairs burned out, plunging the house back into absolute darkness. I lay on my bed, my eyes wide open, staring at nothing. The image of the kiss played on a loop in my mind, a slow-motion horror film with no end. It was seared onto the inside of my eyelids, a brand of betrayal that I knew would never fade. This is a heartbreaking moment for any child. If you're finding this story powerful, please let us know by liking the video and subscribing. And if you've ever felt a pain that left you speechless, press 1 in the comments. Now, let's see how Lily begins to navigate this new, broken world. Something inside me died that night. My innocence, my absolute faith in the permanence of love, the feeling of being unconditionally cherished. My father came home the next morning to a house shrouded in a heavy, suffocating silence. Life went on, but it was a pantomime. We were 3 strangers living under one roof, each trapped in a private, soundproof prison of pain and silence. And I, in the middle of it all, stopped hoping for a miracle. I simply began to endure, growing up a little more each day in a silence that stretched on like a winter with no end. It was my grandfather, George, who finally saw the ghost haunting my eyes. He was a man of few words, but immense wisdom. A man who believed that presence was more powerful than platitudes. He started visiting more often, his gentle eyes taking in the strained smiles and the hollow conversations. One afternoon, he found me on the porch swing, staring into space. He sat beside me, not speaking, just sharing the silence. After a long while, I turned to him, my voice a broken whisper. "Grandpa, why does it feel like everyone is so far away, even when they're right here?" He pulled me into a warm, sturdy hug, his rough hand patting my back. "Because sometimes, sweetheart," he murmured into my hair, "people get so hurt, they forget how to love each other properly." The next morning, he showed up with a small backpack and a smile. "Your mom and dad need to talk," he said, winking. "How about you and I go on an adventure to the sea?" And just like that, we left the silent house behind. As Grandpa George's old pickup truck rumbled down the highway, with the windows rolled down and the salty air whipping through my hair, I felt the first glimmer of hope. On the beach, away from the suffocating weight of my home, we built sandcastles, flew a kite, and hunted for treasure, a sparkling blue rock he'd hidden for me. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in fiery strokes of orange and purple, we sat on the sand, and I finally asked the question that had been poisoning my heart. "Grandpa, why do adults hurt each other?" He looked out at the endless horizon, his voice as calm and steady as the tide. "Because adults, Lily, are often just children who have been hurt themselves. We get busy, we get tired, we get scared. And sometimes, in our fear of losing something, we do foolish things that hurt the very people we love most." He told me that my mother wasn't evil. She was lost and lonely. He didn't excuse what she did, but he offered a sliver of understanding. "Forgiveness, Lily," he said, his warm hand on my shoulder, "isn't about forgetting the pain. It's about accepting that everyone stumbles. And if you hold on to anger, the only person you're keeping locked in a cage is yourself." He then told me a story about how he had once hurt my grandmother, how he had taken her for granted until she almost left him. It took him years to earn back her trust, not with words, but with change. Some things, once they're broken, can never be exactly the same again, he said softly. But that doesn't mean they can't become something new. A lesson, a strength, a new kind of beautiful. He gave me a small jar filled with colorful pieces of sea glass. "These are the broken pieces of the ocean," he told me. "But look how they still sparkle. Your heart, even though it's been hurt, can learn to sparkle again, too." When I came home, something had shifted inside me. I walked into the house and saw my mother standing there, her eyes filled with a desperate, remorseful plea. For the first time, instead of just seeing her betrayal, I saw her pain. I walked up to her, and without a word, I hugged her. She collapsed into my arms, sobbing. My dad came over and put his hand on her shoulder, and for the first time in months, we were touching, a broken but real family. The days that followed were not easy. They were a slow, clumsy dance of rebuilding. My parents started talking, really talking. There were tears and painful truths. I learned to respond to my mother's tentative gestures of love, a nod here, a shared glance there. It wasn't a magical fix. The cracks were still there, but we were slowly, painstakingly filling them with a new kind of glue, forgiveness, patience, and a fragile, hard-won hope. I learned that a family isn't something that's perfect and unbreakable. It's something you fight for, something you rebuild, piece by painful piece. And like the sea glass in my jar, our family, though broken, was learning how to sparkle again in its own unique, imperfect way. Lily's story is a powerful reminder that love is not about perfection, and forgiveness is not a sign of weakness, but of profound strength. It's the choice to let go of the weight of anger, to allow your own heart the space to heal and to love again. Her grandfather didn't offer easy answers. He offered wisdom, presence, and the understanding that even broken things can be beautiful. What did you take away from this story? The lesson for me is that true healing comes not from forgetting, but from understanding. Thank you so much for joining us today. If this story resonated with you, please show your support by liking this video and subscribing. And if you believe in the power of forgiveness, press 1 in the comments below. We'll see you in the next story.